it's much easier to get people invested in what you're doing, right? Like if you're doing something cool, you want to be a verb, not a noun kind of early on, right? So you want to be constantly in motion, achieving things and displaying that to the world because like people are watching a work in progress.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. This is episode 229, and I'm really excited about this one. We've got a very special guest for the show. I'd like to welcome Kyle Circa Lemaire, founding member of the music group band SomeKIDPUNK. And we're going to be talking today about the steps that you could put into place to really crush the first year that you have on your plate as an artist, because there's a lot to do. You got to make music. You got to write music. You got to produce music. You're maybe getting out there and playing shows. And it's really, really easy to get overwhelmed. And I think artists, both that are actually just starting out and are also trying to maybe start over or start fresh, deal with the overwhelm that comes with doing that. And that doesn't even touch on what you need to do when it comes to marketing your music and building a fan base. So we're going to be talking to Circa today all about SomeKIDPUNK and what they've accomplished in their first year as a band. So Circa, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here, man.
So good to be here with you guys.
Very, very excited. Let's just do a quick little recap, a rundown on SomeKIDPUNK. We've had you on the show to talk about the band before. I think you came on last summer, probably around this time, to talk about what you guys were doing and how you were pumping out music. But this will be really interesting. I'm really excited to hear about what you guys have got done in a year. But we'll link to those episodes in the show notes. But just to give a quick recap, what's SomeKIDPUNK? What the heck is it?
Yeah, so SomeKIDPUNK is sort of like an open music project currently in development. And the real goal of it is to, first of all, like I came of adulthood in Orlando, Florida, which has this surprisingly rich and diverse and like really well interconnected music scene. And by managing a recording studio, I met hundreds of really, really talented musicians. And Orlando, people don't break out of Orlando. At least at the time, people were not breaking out of Orlando. Now it's pretty crazy how many have. Like I don't have enough fingers to list off for you the amount of people who have done it in the last 5 years. But basically, like at the time, it was like, man, I would really love to just work with all these people every day. Like that's the goal. And so SomeKIDPUNK is born out of the spirit of that. The goal being like anyone who has made a song with us can inspect like all the songs in development and contribute. And then contributions can be voted out, but they don't need to be voted in. So that way we can like really have a diverse set of all these different musicians, contributing their genius to all these open songs that are like, we have like 30 works in progress, like as at the time of recording. And so that was one of the stipulations, is like try to be open. And then we wanted to, on the back end, open it up. So our goal is to be able to put out all of our instrumentals, all of our vocals, and have further development of these works happen on the back end. So like our first iteration of our website is going to come with some song packs and like people with an open license and just like go use it. Like that was the original intending spirit of it. And then it's also intended to be completely fair with monetization. So there's a formula for how the splits work on any song, and that ensures that, contributors always get compensated. And then the songs aren't actually owned by us. So the company owns the songs. We all control the company as collaborators. So that clears up a bunch of issues there. And then also we release a song every 2 weeks. That was the whole goal. And that started really in earnest. We started releasing in July of last year.
That's a pretty ambitious creative collective. It sounds like it was probably the brainchild of a lot of hanging out and talking with people that kind of mutually respected each other. How did that come about? Like, was it you and one other collaborator to start, and then it's been just gradually added upon? Like, what did that look like?
When it started, I was in the midst of like, I had been a like a live musician locally for like 7 years, but the 5 years before that I was a studio musician, and so I made a lot of studio recordings, and I stopped doing that for a long time. So I was in the process of resurrecting my studio musician career like in 2019, 2020, and out of those sessions came this idea of like, let's all just work together and have it be a group, since we have so many of like our old friends coming and working on stuff.
That's cool. That's really cool. So it was almost like the melding of two worlds for you personally, like this studio work and the creative mind and effort that goes into that, and you know, the performance stuff that you were doing prior to.
Yeah, pretty organically arose. And then the method of doing things is just like a consequence of like, we all used to work together under this publishing agreement that like really sucked and it didn't work out. But like from that, we learned a lot of lessons and, you know, found a way to, you know, hopefully make it fair for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, I feel like ambitious is the word to describe the foundation of what you guys were trying to build. But practically speaking, when it came to actually making the music and starting to get it out there, what did you find yourself up against when it came to doing that? It sounds like the creation process came pretty natural, but what about what happened next?
So yeah, like very early on when we sort of like incorporated as a company in Florida and like started working together, the goal was, let's start off just like, we'll meet twice a week and we'll record songs, and then we'll try to get enough songs to start putting one out every 2 weeks. Like that was the only thing we were thinking of. We knew we had settled all this other stuff, but the main goal was like, release a song every 2 weeks, meet twice a week. That later became 3 times a week that we met. And later on, I started just filming every one of these sessions. So like around 3 sessions in, I was like, I'm just going to film all this stuff. And so that's kind of like how it evolved. The whole first year has been about, let's meet 3 times a week. Let's try to film lots of this stuff. And let's try to put out a song every 2 weeks. And that's like the whole first year.
That's really interesting. So you laid the foundations of like, this is the goals of really our company. This is what we're trying to do as a group. This is, you know, collectively, like we want to treat each other fairly. We want to put out music that's great, and we want it to be somewhat open source, both within our organization and without our organization once we get stuff out there. And we want to have fun and be creative with it and make art that people really, really dig. Once you started that and you were focused on, you know, just being together, creating and batching as much music as you could, what was the time vector for, you know, starting to batch songs to say like first release? I know you said like July was your first release.
Yeah, so I'd say we started working together around like January of 2021. Yeah, and then we were releasing by July.
Got it. Okay, cool. So there was a lot of like groundwork to be laid there. What challenges did you find yourself up against in that period? And then I'm really curious to dig into, for our listeners, like what challenges did you realize once you got to like, okay, it's time to release? Like what the hell do I do now?
Yeah, so, like the first challenge was that I had planned out to do like a music video vignette for every song, like 3 of them. So I would just come up with 3 different ideas that could be part of a music video, but they're really short, and then shoot them. That was like way too hard with like my job and then us making music and then trying to do that. It was way too difficult. So I ended up like, that's how I ended up like coming up with the solution of like, I'll just film every session and we'll have every moment that went into a song on film that we can later sync with the music to create like good audio visual presentations. When we first started releasing, my thinking was like, how should we go about promoting this? Because we had 0 fans, like no one, we were a brand new idea. So really, and we didn't want to like start borrowing fans from our various other projects of all the collaborators. So it was like, let's really start from ground zero. And that's kind of when like figuring out how to get fans came into play.
I want to touch on that for a second. You mentioned like pulling fans from existing projects, and you guys have a, you know, it's a pretty big group of people that you're working with in SomeKIDPUNK. What was the rationale behind not wanting to do that? I think that's something that a lot of our listeners, especially if they're in a place where they're starting a new project and they're maybe coming from another band or a solo project, a lot of people, you know, ask me, hey, how do I get fans to move from one thing to the next? But it sounds like you guys didn't really give a shit about that. And you were just like, let's get people who are going to like this for what it is. So what was the reasoning behind that and how'd you approach it?
I think that if I had a large fan base at that point, I probably would have ported it over, but just by consequence of like what we were setting out to do with the music for this project was so different that like none of the fan bases were appropriate to port over. You know, so it's just like a consequence of necessity, I guess.
Gotcha. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of discernment there that artists sometimes, you know, begrudgingly need to make when it comes to moving from one project to another. Like, does what I'm doing here really fit, you know, where I came from? Are people going to want to follow me? And really, you know, speaking candidly, like, do you have enough connection with your fans that they're going to want to follow you into the next thing? I think that that's a little bit of soul searching and probably some hard questions to ask if you're an artist in that spot.
Yeah, I think it's also like SomeKIDPUNK doesn't have a genre. It has more like a genre space. So like we have songs that sound like punk or, you know, hard rock or like, you know, there's like acoustic folk is like sometimes like the area we're exploring, and we have a lot of hip hop, and then we have a lot of like ballady pop or just like production pop, bedroom pop. So like it really does, like people say like, oh, we don't have a genre. It's like every song is kind of different from one to the next. There are people who hate, like there are people who come in on ads of our hip hop songs where they're like, this is trash. And I'm like, literally go listen to our Spotify and just peruse around. Because I guarantee you, if you hate this, you're going to love this or this. And people come back and say like, oh, wow, like great job. You know, I don't like this, but like this was good. So yeah, like that's kind of, you know, like you're not going to port over a fan base from like we have a collaborator, Chris Cannon, and he's like big in the gospel world. But like we're not going to port over gospel fans to our sort of like freewheeling, you know, secular enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a ton of sense. I'm curious, you mentioned like the content creation immediately showing itself as a bottleneck for you guys, going from wanting to make what it was 3 music video vignettes. What do you mean when you say a vignette for our listeners who might be like, what is this guy talking about?
Music videos typically have like 3 different sets, and one of them has like this like sort of like play theme, like where they're like acting out a real life scenario or something. Or it's like oh, there's cars in your driveway and you're running in front of the cars or whatever, you know, like there's usually different sets and ideas involved in a music video, and you have to shoot all of them and then edit them all together. My idea was like, let's just pick a 15 to 45 second, you know, potential vignette, like a little narrative or a set or like a cool shot, and let's shoot it and then not make it part of a larger music video. Let's just make it its own standalone thing. Which is fun for me because I love videography, but you know, it's way too time consuming. I did like 4 of them and I was like, this shit is not going to work.
Yeah, sounds like it very quickly became overwhelming. And that was leading into the first release.
Yeah, I mean, before the first release, I had already resolved to like, I'm just going to shoot every session, and then we have an archive of footage that, as long as I label it, that we can use for whatever.
I'd be curious to hear the advice that you'd give to an artist based on that experience who finds himself immersed in the creation process, which I think a lot of artists and bands do. You know, that's what they love to do, is make music, play music, record music, write music.
Like one thing I do want to say about that is that like, man, like such a large part of what larger artists and their fans derive from them, like, is like they're large. Like who they are is a component of how fans perceive them. And when you make a music video or you make some kind of like archetype defining piece of content, that's like, look at me, you know, if you're not already huge, like it's unlikely you're going to get people to invest in who you are at this stage, because they don't know who you are and no one else does. And there's no social pressure on them to know who you are. And there's no evidence that you are anyone that important. So it's like you're fighting the tide there. It's much easier to get people invested in what you're doing, right? Like if you're doing something cool, you know, you want to be a verb, not a noun, kind of early on, right? So you want to be constantly in motion, achieving things and displaying that to the world because like people are watching a work in progress. So that's not something I would have necessarily pontificated about like this early on. But in retrospect, I can see that like, yeah, once it became about the project. The project was like a meta self-reference of like, this is what we're doing. We're meeting 2-3 times a week. All of us are like skilled in these different areas, and we're making this music and content. Come join. And like let's let that be the spectacle.
That's cool. That's really cool. And I think, you know, speaking as an artist and a fan of music, a lot of the bands and artists that I've picked up over the years that I really like, you know, when you find somebody and you feel like you're a day one, I think a lot of times you get wrapped up in the what they're doing and not so much the who they are, especially if you're early. And that's really interesting. And you guys are kind of, I wouldn't say trying to orchestrate that, but like, because you allowed the process and the project to be the focus, and it was just like, we're doing this because we like it, and we're going to let people in on what it is that we're doing, that attracts people.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you walk into, you know, if you come across a piece of content that's like very hero centric, like, you know, it's got one big rotating shot of like a person singing in the rain, and then like it's them like in a faux narrative scenario. It's like a music video, right? Like, if you don't know who they are, and you know, like, chances are you're just gonna go about your day, you know?
What is this clown doing?
Yeah. When you see a bunch of people excited together, social, working on something, and it's in your wheelhouse of interest, like you're interested in music, you're interested in these things, then you can fixate on your affinity for like the thing they're doing instead of the who they are. They're all sort of, you know, they just serve as a conduit of like, I'm enjoying this experience with, okay, someone has a guitar, someone's in front of a microphone, someone's, you know, recording them, like, and they're all talking to each other. That's like a social sort of like fly on the wall scenario. I think it's more compelling if you, in the event that you don't know who they are and you have no reason to.
For sure, yeah. Now, here's a follow-up question to that. I think it sounds like you have a well-defined sense of what kinds of people would be interested in what you guys are doing or what SomeKIDPUNK is doing. What has the process looked like of that? Is there an avatar that you guys have kind of defined? And for our listeners, you've heard me talk about avatars before, but really all it is that I'm talking about when I say that is when I talk about an avatar, we're kind of stereotyping a fan. What are the things that they're interested in? What do they look like? Where do they live? How old are they? Are they a woman? Are they a man? What kind of interests do they have? We're kind of laying out here that SomeKIDPUNK's avatar might look like someone that is interested in the creation process, the creative process of music, that wants to be a fly on the wall. But like, has that played out for you guys, that you found that? And what does that sort of look like? And do you feel like you're restricting yourself to that?
No, like we don't have a customer avatar or a fan avatar. And the reason being is that like, there's almost guaranteed to be a song in our catalog you just are not interested in, even if you like a lot of the stuff. There's guaranteed to be at least one, you know? So it's hard to define like who's going to like what, because when we're advertising, we advertise to general lifestyle audiences all of our songs. But when we see something perform really well, then we try to isolate out different audiences that might have an affinity for that song specifically. So I have this ballady, like Adele-ish, Amy Winehouse-ish, like, or, you know, like it's just a ballad. It's like a pop ballad that's like more like old school, like crooner type, I guess, like melodies and stuff. So you picture like fans like of like Adele would like it. And so once it started outperforming everything in our tests, like where we're targeting a general lifestyle audience, I broke it out into its own campaign of like singers, you know, and it turns out to be a lot of women. It turns out to be a lot of like women who probably aren't interested in like Young Thug or like the Viagra Boys.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
And so like that's one avatar, but it's for that song. Whereas like our general audiences tend to be people interested in clothing brands that are like, you know, within the sort of streetwear realm. And then also public media like figures and, you know, content sources is like a big target of ours.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's talk about that then. So sounds like the first 6 months of 2021, your first year, and I'm laying this out very intentionally to try and give our listeners like a roadmap for if you find yourself in a position like this where you're in your first year, like here are two pillars that I think are really important to focus on. And one is content creation. And I mean that all the way from the actual creation of the music to the ancillary content that goes with it. Sounds like that was your first, 7 months. And then just continuing that process throughout the rest of the year. But what happened when you started releasing? What was going on there? Where did your focus land in terms of actually marketing this stuff and starting to build a fan base?
One thing is like, I see no reason to start releasing or even start planning a release until you know how what you're doing is going to be an ongoing spectacle. Like, and that comes down to like music creation and content creation. Just like we had to like grapple with in our first 6 months is like, okay, if I, as a stunt, go and pull in all these resources to record an album, and then I, as a stunt, pull in all these resources to record the recording of that album and make a bunch of content, that's not something I'm doing. It's going to quickly become something I did. And that only can last for so long. It's eventually going to like, not only will it run out of steam in terms of how effective it is as a promotional tool, but it's also going to run out of steam in terms of like, okay, whatever gains you got, they're probably going to be underwhelming compared to the effort you put forth. And you're going to be exhausted. And then you're going to have to go back to the drawing board to put forth another effort to get to the next level. And you're just kind of going to be spinning your wheels. I've seen people do it a lot because like I've seen a lot of albums get released in Orlando and like, they put forth this Herculean, not normal effort to get it as a finished piece of music. And then they're going to dump it all at once as an album with maybe a few lead singles. And they're going to be exhausted. So we didn't want to do that. We were like, first, let's figure out how we're going to put out music all the time and do this all the time. And then let's figure out how we're going to document that and show the world. And so we emphasize showing us and what we're doing a lot less than we emphasize promoting any one given song. In fact, we don't really even like have a strong release process yet. So like when a song comes out, oftentimes I don't even know it came out until I like check Spotify for artists. I'm like, oh, okay, this song came out today. Cool. And I'll maybe go share it on Instagram, but like, that's not the focus.
Right. The focus is on the creation process, really.
Yeah. Like the content that we put out, like, a lot of our songs don't pop until like weeks later, months later, when we start to identify like pieces of content that work really well to send people it through,
I want to talk about that for a second. So like that is like a true principle of like post marketing, post-release marketing, as opposed to trying to have some, like you were saying, a Herculean effort of pre-release lead up and, macho man kind of, or macho woman kind of efforts to put together the perfect record and release it to some kind of, massive stunt event that eventually will just burn you out because you can't keep doing that over and over and over again. I think that that's really, really interesting and super important for artists that are just starting out to consider, because at the stage that you guys were at, like, let's say you went the opposite direction. You were like, we're going to get a body of work together and we're going to try to pull something off, and it's going to be this massive stunt, and hopefully the results get us to where we want them to be. If you had done that, you wouldn't really have the audience there to care about it.
It's a disadvantageous way to introduce yourself to the world, and it's an even worse way to find out who you are, like as an artist, because that's something you probably don't. It's probably going to evolve as you go along, and you want a lot of at-bats. Like that's why I'm a big proponent of early on artists. Don't make a big thing. Make many small things.
When you say that, are you talking about singles, or are you talking about, even further than that, many small things, micro content and stuff like that?
Micro content, like for sure. Like you can release an album and have it be successful as a launching point, but you'd need a really abnormal work ethic, and you need, even still, you're going to need lots of pieces of content, more than the average artist, I think, like presumes. Like, I think the 502s had like 5 videos with their first album, all told.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And then they were willing to show up every day on live, on, you know, the timeline, on the feed with a video, and talk to their fans, you know.
I think in my experience working with artists, you know, at the agencies and consulting with artists, one of the biggest underestimations that artists make is the sheer amount of content creation that they need to be doing and need to have in their back pocket. So yeah, that's very well said. Finding a way to do that in a manageable effort, I think, is really, really helpful and probably leads to a lot less burnout. Did you guys ever run across that have you run across that in this process? Obviously, like, life things happen, job things happen. I know Chris moved. How did you guys navigate as a band in this first year? How did you navigate, you know, the things that were going on outside of the band and fitting all of this in, since it sounds like you were pretty prolific in kind of treating this like a second job?
I think a big help for us was that, one, we had a big backlog of songs when we started releasing, and still do. Like, I think we have 6 finished masters that I could put out tomorrow, but that obviously like extends us out 3 months from now. So we can survive any downtime, really. And like, even still, like, there's probably songs in development that I could say to Iggy, like our main producer, to just say like, hey, like, get this to mix queue somehow. And he could without me. And so, yeah, like, that's a big help. And then, like, I just had a kid. I have like a now 1.5-month-old. And like, I had to stop everything, like, when she was newborn and during her birth, obviously. And I'm only now slightly getting back to, like, you know, I'm back at work and I'm working on music again. And it's not at full capacity, but that's fine because we have so much music. And also, like, when Chris moved, like, that was a huge hit. But again, the group's not contingent on, you know, any one person being at every session. That's, you know, like, we can queue up music, get music started. We have other people, like, as vocalists that are working on stuff. And then when Chris comes and visits, he can add his flair to every song that's in development. So
I think that's great. That's a lot of stuff. And I think that's a question that a lot of artists have, is like, how do I, you know, let's say I'm working a full-time job. How do I do this alongside with the other things that I have going on in my life that I'm needed in? Having a kid, moving, having another job, paying your bills. You know, your artist project, in a lot of cases, especially when you're starting out, is competing with the other things that you have to be paying attention to. It sounds like it's cool that you guys have this collective where you can kind of lean on each other. Like you said with Iggy, if you guys needed to get a song out, you could say to him, let's get this done, and rely on it to happen.
Yeah. And like, because we have songs always coming out, we can just run our ads, you know, like, we run our ads, and even if I don't swap in new ones or try out new things in like a 3-month time period, like, it's still going to keep getting us fans. And there's always a new song coming around the bend.
Let's talk about that a little bit then. What has been, you went from ground zero fans, to where you guys are at now. What does that growth look like? What were the expectations that you set for yourself, first of all? And what strategies did you start to tap with all of this content that you were kind of backlogging?
If you give every process that you need to complete before you're like running a fully functioning business as a music career, if you just line up all those processes, a lot of times people, like, let's say it's 6, right? Get fans, you know, build like sort of culture and community and branding with those fans. So like, they know they have their own vernacular. They have places where they can congregate. Like, they are communicating with you back and forth. Like, those are all important things. And then you need to like find a way to talk to them directly. That's not just social media. So maybe that's an email list or a text list. And then you need to start like putting out things for sale and getting sales to fund the whole operation. So like, a lot of people try to do all those at once. It can work if you're an extraordinary human being and you have an extraordinary like, group.
Talking back about Stunts, yeah.
Yeah, like it can. I'm not saying it can't work, but it's just like, I try to think of things more and more as I get older in probabilities. And it's like, you're playing in the middle there, and you need like a lot of luck. But if you play at the extremes, you know, and go with a lot more cautious or defensive approach and build one at a time, I think like you're increasing your odds. And so, yeah, like first thing for us was we need to be able to make music and content regularly. Because if we can't do that, then the whole thing could go to shit just because like of some external event. So as long as that's safe, like we're safe. So let's get that in place. Then it was like, let's make sure that we can continue producing this content while we're in a release status. We're releasing every 2 weeks. Can we keep this up? And then once it got there, it was like, can we get fans? Can we get more fans at a higher clip? So we did a lot of organic posting for the first like year. I made content, episodic content, different types of content, and put it out. And we were just trying to hit for a consistency and a stability. And once we got there, I actually met with you, Jack, and Ed from the 502s and like asked about what's working best right now with ads in terms of top of funnel, meaning like how do I get listeners? How do I get fans?
Right. Yep. I remember this conversation.
Right. And then I just kind of took what they said and went and did it. And it started working really well. And now, you know, now we have a lot of fans. We have a fair amount of fans.
What specifically have you focused on from the ads perspective? Because, you know, there's so much out there that you could do. What did you dive into? Of the things that we talked about, what did you pick out? When
I last left off, like, having my hands in music advertising seriously was like years ago. And at the time it was in vogue, and sort of what like generally we were recommending is like, let's get attention without trying to generate clicks, because clicks were like still kind of more foreign. Now with influencer marketing, clicks and swipe ups have become a lot more soft to the average person. Like they're not as threatening an activity. And so getting eyeballs without getting clicks isn't as much of a concern anymore. And so I just basically took the Indepreneur recommendation set and applied it, right? Like Fan Finder method, and moreover like Follower Finder, trying to get people off of a social media platform with a piece of content over to Spotify, because we were trying to grow our Spotify at that time. And so I implemented Instagram Reels ads with just performance videos, fan finders, because we have high quality video of every time we've recorded anything. So I can put that on the screen and show you the moment that we were tracking this verse, or the moment that we were tracking this like guitar or chorus or whatever, and have that be compelling in like a quick format. And so, yeah, we went with that. We just started putting out tons of these vertical performance videos and advertising them, and all of them go to our Spotify profile. And so we're cross targeting, and anyone we're targeting, they also must be into Spotify. We're not so sure about the data quality of like saying they're into Spotify. And if we want to go with a more general audience, we'll put them to like a landing page with like lots of options on it. But ultimately we want to build up our Spotify streaming because we want to start getting algorithmic success in Spotify. We want Spotify to start, you know, getting us Discover Weekly. Since we release so often, it's a lot more heavily weighted advantageous for us to have Spotify doing work and finding our fan.
Right. That's a really important caveat to make. I think the tack on that you made at the end there about your release frequency and how Spotify's algorithm plays into that. Not a blanket recommendation of just relying on that if you're putting out a single every 4 months or something.
Right. Yeah. Pushing people to like, but that's not to say that like it's not worth it to trigger Discover Weekly for that song in that 4 month period. But we're going for like every time we release, we want 3 weeks, 4 weeks of release radar, and then we immediately want Discover Weekly to appear sometime in there. Meaning like Spotify's picked up our song and said, we know who to recommend this to, and we're going to start recommending it to people. Because once we get there, our songs typically take off. Like our song Pickup was out for 4 or 5 weeks, or 6 weeks even. And then it got Discover Weekly and like 20x'd its performance. Same with our song We Don't Make It to Midnight. So that's really what we're looking for. And I don't know if I should say this, but like ideally we want to hit up DistroKid and say like we want discovery mode, which is this like really shady practice that's been being done now, where you can sacrifice some of your streaming revenue in order to get a lot more often and at a lot greater distribution, get discovered on Spotify through Discover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Let's talk about Pickup. I think that's a good use case to kind of take a micro moment in what you guys have been doing, since there's so many of there's so many of these moments to talk about and so much stuff that you're pumping out. Like I think it would be helpful to use Pickup as like a microcosm of marketing for you guys, specifically since you mentioned like it was out for 4 to 5 weeks, then it hit Discover Weekly, and then the performance 20x. What were you guys doing in that 4 to 5 weeks? Like, lay that out for me. I think a lot of our listeners do wonder, like, you know, what are some of the outside the box kind of things I could be thinking about when it comes to dropping a single, and what can I be doing to maximize the benefit that I get once it's out?
Well, so like early on, we had created all these episodic, like in the studio videos, like what we call dailies on the Instagram feed. And in Instagram ads, not in Facebook ads where you have like a lot more control, but like in the Instagram app, in that ads platform, we were just running very, very basic ad spends on these videos. Nothing crazy, no crazy targeting.
Light boosting.
Yeah, just boosting to like a very broad audience. And that gave us qualitative data about which of these videos was performing best. From that, we could infer like, is it the set? Is it what we're doing in the video? Is it the song? And over again, Pickup was a constant factor in all the videos that were performing very well. And that's a song that we had created. And so when we put it out, there was already a huge audience asking for it. Right now, there's the same thing going on with a song we have called Superstar Insect that's coming out later this month. We have the same thing all over again. And people are like, when does this drop? They're like being violent about it. Yeah, it rocks. So same thing was going on with Pickup. And so when the day finally came to put it out, basically everyone who had whoever listened to Pickup in that first 4 weeks was people who had been waiting for it for months. And that really helped out. So sending all these signals to Spotify of just people who love this song. They're the exact right person. We already found them like weeks ago.
Table rush.
Yeah, exactly. So it was such a great signal for Spotify, because up until then we hadn't gotten Discover Weekly on any of our songs. And our Spotify audience was pretty small. Like all of our songs had less than 1,000 streams, well into like August, I think. And so we kept running the same ads, kept pushing people to Pickup. And soon thereafter, with these like organic post boosting and organic pushing people to the song, we got to, and the song just grew by itself because like all these people really liked it. It's a really catchy song. And so,
yeah, it's fire. It's a great song. Definitely my favorite of the batch.
yeah. It came out really good. And so through that, eventually Spotify, it takes a certain popularity score, certain internal signals to Spotify before they're like, okay, you're a small artist, but this song is big enough for us to start recommending it to people. When they started recommending it to people in Discover Weekly, it got like 6K streams above the mean or something like that. Or like, you know, like 3K on that initial bump. And like the listeners shot up, you know, probably like 1,000 or 800 or something like that. The next one was like 17K streams and like, you know, several thousand listeners. And so that's like 2 Mondays in a row where Discover Weekly came out. And then from there, it just skyrocketed. So that was probably like, you know, it wasn't completely organic because we are boosting these posts. But it was as close to an organic success as you can get. We considered it to be a good sign that like, okay, this part of our strategy is settled. We have songs that are coming out that people like. They can get big on Spotify. It's worth it to push that traffic to Spotify after qualifying it. So let's dig in there. And that became a larger part of like what we're doing with ads now, you know?
For sure. Yeah. That's a really interesting strategy. And I think it sounds like it wasn't too challenging or ambitious, because really all you guys were focused on, going back to kind of your 5 or 6 like processes that were going to be in SomeKIDPUNK's arsenal, you know, making music and content, getting fans, starting to think about building culture, talking with those fans directly, and then making sales. Really, in this stage, all you were focusing on was like, how can we acquire fans and how can we move them to the place where we think they're going to be most likely to engage with us.
Yeah, literally the whole goal for the first year was like, we just need to find attention, get exposure. Not even an emphasis on really developing that exposure. Like, because once you have exposure, once you're getting in front of lots of people all at once, then you need a way to like refine that into a culture and like have everyone be like partying at the same time, you know, and like aware of each other. Like that's a whole different part of it. And we very rigidly for the first year, we're like, we need to get it in front of people and we need them to like that. That's it. That's all we need.
And that's it. Yeah. That's 100% like probably the biggest recommendation that I would make to artists that are just starting out with a project or starting out with a band is with your releases, don't go for the jugular and try to get like, you know, people to sign up for your Patreon at $100 a month or something when they don't even know who you are.
Or even like $1 a month, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I was using the most extreme example that I possibly could.
Right. Like, but like there's people out there who might think, but like $5 is cool. And it's
no, not really. No, it's not.
Whoever it does work for, you haven't yet developed a system that proves to you that it can work for large amounts of people.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. There are those people that may have naturally found themselves on that path, but there are far fewer of them than you might imagine. And you can't assume that you're going to be able to have a process to turn people from cold new fan to, you know, Patreon subscriber in such a short time horizon.
Yeah, it's like, would you rather a year from now be like slightly ahead in terms of like your process and like where how many fans you have and just have to sort of like do everything ad hoc? Or would you rather have a system that produces new music on a regular basis and have a lot more fans, a lot more attention that you can now sculpt? There's a lot of like focus, like self-help stuff that's like one thing, right?
Yeah, do the one thing. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Just generally speaking, like from a music marketing perspective, that's where your focus was, and sounds like it still is.
No, I mean, right now we're developing our website, and we want to start to get into sculpting that attention. So, can we start doing regular? I put out a video on Instagram that's now our most popular reel. That was just me in front of the camera explaining what is SomeKIDPUNK. And now we're retargeting that to people who engage with our Instagram.
Nice. Awesome. We talk about a similar kind of strategy to that inside the turn listeners into fans training inside Indie Pro.
Right.
You know, make this talking head video that really goes deep into who you are. Sounds like you kind of took a page from that.
Yeah, I think like the whole next year is about how to turn listeners into fans. It's that stage of things. Content. We have trainings in Indie Pro that are like, okay, how to turn listeners into fans, content blitz blueprint, and then the soon to be build a perfect artist website, like get our branding in place. I think branding is a big part of sculpting listeners and exposure into fans. It's like they need to be part of a brand in a way. And how to create your brand. It's another great set of trainings from Indie Pro that's going to help us get to that stage. So the whole next year, by the end of the second year, we want to have scaled our exposure generating efforts that we solidified in that first year, and we want to have a solid brand, and we want to be in a place where we can massively grow an email list. So like the prerequisites to growing email list sales, which will probably be the third year, we want all those in place. What are those prerequisites? We need a website. We need like a conversation ongoing with people. We need a form of recurring content that people can show up for and sort of self-elect to be a part of it. So right now, you know that we have a song coming out every 2 weeks, but beyond that, you don't know what to show up for. We want, you know, maybe a YouTube series, maybe like a live streaming setup, something where we can make people a part of what we're doing. And that's like developing listeners into fans.
Right. It sounds like you guys have done a really good job of setting realistic goals for yourselves year over year that you can pivot on. Like, I'm not saying they're set in stone, but it sounds like you've done a really good job of doing that based on your needs and where you know your needs are going to be based on the audience that you're building. What advice would you give to someone who maybe doesn't have such clarity on how to do that?
I think like the biggest part is like if you're just starting out, you need a way to put out music and content. Once you have a way to put out music and content consistently, you need a way to generate attention on that content and music consistently. That could very well be, and probably should be, your whole first year. It's like, just focus on that. Systems that you can rely on that are going to work in bad conditions, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think something that a lot of artists that I talk with and bands that I talk with that are trying to grow and they want to tap into advertising, or they're interested in other promotional efforts that are less effective. One of the big things that I think is often missing is like, okay, but how are you doing the consistency on the actual creation front? Like how's that going? Because so often it's not.
Yeah, I think a huge part of our first year was we were in a period where it was like, we need to be able to put out X amount of videos or posts and X amount of songs like per month. And we're not moving on until we hit that for like 3 months running or something like that. And it's scarcely a memory now, but like the effects of us having done that are a lot more present and noticeable than the actual memory of us having gone through that period. You know, like we run like that. That's how we operate, is as if we did that, and we did. So yeah, like you'll find out a lot of what's not feasible. This isn't to say like pick a thing and then kill yourself until it works. Like pick a thing that you think might not kill you and will work. And if it does kill you, adjust it down.
Right.
This is your year to do that. You know, this is your year to figure out, what am I going to be able to keep up with and present?
That's gold. I think that's gold advice. The first year is the year to find out if what you're aiming to do is going to kill you, and then how to make it so that it doesn't kill you. That's great.
Yeah, big time.
That's super good advice. I dig that a lot.
We found out very quickly that the video vignettes were not feasible. And it's like, great. We adjusted down.
Yeah. What kind of content doesn't work for you? Both from you learn quickly both what your fans care about and also what you can or can't feasibly create to stay consistent. Because that's half the battle.
Yeah, like we also dropped the dailies. The narrative episodes we were editing and releasing, we released a whole season of them in this huge like grid. And by the end of it, I was like, this isn't going to work again. We need to like adjust that down. So yeah, definitely take that time. And if you set like those modest goals of like, I just want to get to a place where I have a process for creating and releasing music and content, and I have a way to get exposure with that music and content. If you just sit down to that, then it's an exploratory process of like, how do I do that? Instead of you like having some like arbitrary goal, like X amount of like sales or email lists or dollars. Like process-oriented goals are appropriate for your first year, I'll say.
Yeah, I dig that. I think that that's really, really good advice. Any final thoughts or pieces of advice that you might give to artists that are in a similar spot to you? I think we pretty adequately summed up where you guys are at and where you're going.
Yeah, like just like the odds of you crushing it every week and doing everything you could do are very low. And shooting for it places you in a like statistical sticky wicket. Like you're the odds are against you. So, you know, don't be too hard on yourself and set your goals thusly. Like really shoot to do the smaller things, like the beginning things, really, really well in such a way that like makes you want to keep doing it for years, because it's going to be probably like all said and done. Like, you know, I'll probably be sitting with you at year 3 mark and saying like, yeah, okay, this is a business, but not year 2.5, you know?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's with a lot of concerted, focused effort. This isn't like half-assing it, you know? I think that's worth saying here. Like you're setting what you think is a realistic goal based on a lot of work being put in, and a lot of work in a lot of areas.
But also like you have a life, presumably.
What are you talking about?
If you're not at a place where it's a business yet, it's not going to pay your bills. So you have something else that's paying your bills, and you have to do that. And it's like, great. knowing that the chance that you're going to be able to max out every free hour you now see in your schedule with, dedication to this is low. You're not going to max out every free hour. You're going to hit different patches of your life. So like focusing on feasibility and processes early on, just trying to get to, I need to be able to get exposure. I don't need to have all the exposure. I don't need to be world famous. I just need to be able to get exposure on my own terms in a way that's sustainable by the end of this year. And in searching for that, you'll have lots of fans. We hit like 32,000 monthly listeners on Spotify from dead zero in our first year. You're going to get that, but like, don't worry about that number. Worry about the process that's sustainable that gets you there. Because then you never have to stop, and this thing works. So you have a thing that works that you never have to stop doing because it's infeasible. That's so much more powerful.
Definitely. I totally agree. And I don't want to get on my soapbox here about advertising, but it sounds like that's probably been a part of that. It's consistency. It's predictable. It's a faucet that you can turn on. So again, I'm not going to get on my soapbox about advertising, but if you guys want to learn some of the things that Cirque's been talking about and you're not a member of Indie Pro, we'll link to Indie Pro in the show notes so that you can check it out and see not only the fan finder method training that Cirque talked about when it came to generating fans, but also how to turn those listeners into fans and take them beyond just someone new who's coming into your world. So we'll make sure to point that out in the show notes for you guys if you want to check it out. But thanks so much for being here, dude. This was a lot of fun.
Dude, it was a blast.
Yeah, super insightful for sure about how to be process oriented in your creative projects. And I think that this applies not just to artists and bands. Like you could be a YouTuber and thinking about this sort of stuff the same way, a vlogger. You could be you could be a recipe blogger for all I care. A lot of this stuff really stands kind of like the test of a creative business.
Yeah, 100%. And also, not to steal the soapbox, but like, there's no way we could have done what we've done without advertising. And I feel no detriment whatsoever to our brand or our like feasibility and viability because we're using advertising. Everyone who sees our ads says, I'm glad I saw this ad, or like, this ad got me, like no one's saying, I like this, but it's an ad, so fuck you. Like no one's saying that.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't worry about that. If you're scared of advertising, like you're just shooting yourself massively in the foot. You're making it so much harder on yourself. You're stacking the odds against you if you're not, unless you have like zero budget and advertising is just not a thing. But chances are, like in your first year, you would have spent some amount of money on something that's less effective and less reliable. So might as well spend it on advertising.
Yeah, well said. Well, thanks so much, dude. I appreciate you being here. Indies, I hope you guys dug this. I hope if any of you are listening and are kind of at the starting line of your music career, think about the things that Cirque talked about with SomeKIDPUNK and the processes that they've put in place and the things specifically that they've been focusing on, and put them into the works for your project and see what it can do. Also,
if you're an Indie Pro, I don't know when this comes out, but I'm doing a ground report on my first year in ground reports.
Oh yeah, by the time this episode is out, that ground report will be inside of our Indie Pro member area. So if you want to check it out, we're going to get a little bit deeper into this. So dig into that as well, and we'll catch you guys next time on Creative Juice. Peace out, Indies.